Welcome to Convos, unheard and disregarded on iHeart's IntellectualRadio.com on this awesome Labor Day as we celebrate the labor movement, celebrating the social and economic achievement of American workers, the antithesis of everything the Republican is about, as well as their presidential nominee. I'm your co-host, Kanaria Yukumare, last day to wear white. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Frank Bass.
Hello, everyone. Happy Labor Day. I hope you all are getting some good barbecue and enjoying this nice weather while we still have it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And for the conformists out there, it is the last day to wear white. And they think they'd say no more linen after 12 midnight. But for those that are the iconoclasts out there, I encourage you to keep that white going as long as possible, not in the spirit of Trump, but in the spirit of fashion. So, as many of you know, this is a weekly conversational intersection of policy and politics using current news as a bad backdrop. Unfortunately, many of the opinions and perspectives from Black folk go unheard or are in many cases disregarded. So this show allows our listeners to be better informed about the world around you from a Black perspective. By simply going to IntellectualRadio.com, we invite those near and far to not only listen, but be an active participant. So let's get into it. Last week was an interesting week for Trump as he continued to hug certain communities and stab them in the back at the same time. Frank, as you know, the Republican presidential nominee for the United States of America was in Mexico this week.
That's right.
And he gave a speech highlighting, I guess it was his first foreign policy trip, as he I guess it was a dry run to make it look as though he would come across presidential. But from what I understand, they forgot a lot of things, starting off with respect, but also the U.S. flag, if you recall
there was
press
no
conference.
U.S. flag.
Yeah, they forgot to put up the U.S. flag. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, the way he did it was the exact opposite of protocol. He didn't get clearance with the Secret Service. They didn't have a plan. The U.S. Embassy down there advised him not to do this last-minute deal because what if something were to happen to him? What if he were to get kidnapped? Or what if his helicopter got shot at?
Right.
Now a presidential candidate is in trouble and putting himself in a situation that he didn't have to be in. Then he got down there and punked out. I would say punked out.
Okay. Compared
to how he talked when he's in Arizona later on.
Right.
We didn't talk about how or who was going to pay for it. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. He also talked about, the great things that the two countries can do and work together on stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But there was, no regular Donald Trump. There was no, I'm Donald Trump and, everything is the way I want it to be and it's going to be the way I say it is. And that's it. And so that's totally opposite of the Donald Trump, 4 hours later.
That's right. He gave the speech in Mexico, extending the olive branch, and that was the first tale of Trump. We ended up having a tale of two Trumps, where a few hours later he was in Arizona, and he continued to throw red meat at his constituents.
Right. Remember, he said, now you know who's gonna pay for the wall. Mexico is gonna pay for the wall. But when he was in Mexico, he didn't say, hey, we're going to make you pay for the wall, or let's discuss ways in which you're going to pay for the wall. And the thing about it is, you got a guy that's running who's going to say whatever he feels the audience that's in front of him at that moment is going to like, versus how he feels in a general sense. Right.
So he continued to make a buffoon of himself. Misrepresented the country in Mexico. Didn't wish this upon him, but I was hoping that El Chapo would not make an appearance in Mexico. That did not happen, blessedly, but unfortunately he came back to the United States and was true to form, and only the Trump way that he knows how. continuing to disrespect and throw Mexicans under the bus as he makes an effort to appeal to his constituents in Mexico. Then he pulled out the knife again to hug the African American community this weekend in Detroit and ended up stabbing black folks in the back again.
Well, you know what, Canoe? What I don't understand is, what does he mean when he say the blacks?
Well, anytime you have that noun indicator, that comes before the blacks, you can pretty much guarantee that someone that's misinformed or purposely misinforming is articulating nonsense. The blacks. And as you know, he was in Detroit, Michigan this weekend, speaking to an African American, with the goal of speaking to an African American congregation. This all in response to criticism he received for trying to advise the black community and indicate and determine or make the argument as to why the African American community should vote for Trump. So the Trump campaign's response was, we're going to go to Detroit and we are going to speak to African American congregants. Well, he went to this church in Detroit. As many of you know, what happened? Well, the congregation protested by not showing up. They opted to sit that dance out. He continued to give a speech anyway to the small number of people that were present. Many people saw the pictures of the congregation in Facebook. It looked like an hour and a half before the as many of you who are familiar with the black church, there's usually the praise team. If you get there an hour and a half before the praise team comes out, that is exactly what the congregation looked like. So there were about 15 people there. And in some of his remarks, he highlighted the fact that the Republican Party is the one that freed the slaves. So he was using that as a justification as to why African Americans should come out and vote for him. Continues to put his foot in his mouth. I know he has a series of black surrogates, not the least of which was a pastor who was caught lying about his military service, lying about his education, and lying about the fact that he was a Kappa. And so these are his advisors. And to me, it's becoming a comedy show, to say the least.
Now, you know what? Now, I will give Trump this credit. I do appreciate the fact that he's calling Democrats out.
If there's a silver lining in this Trump thing, that is one of the silver linings.
The mere fact that he's talking about, and Canoe, I talk to you about this all the time in Springfield, about how, we're not really getting the same return on our vote as, I would say, other ethnic groups. Ask yourself, if you live in a black neighborhood in the city of Chicago or in Detroit, and let's say you've been voting Democrat for the last 30 years, what have you gotten for it? What is your return? When you see the upper middle class white folks voting Republican in like DuPage County or up in Kenilworth, you see a return for your vote. But why do we have to go out here and protest for expungement rights?
Right.
Why do we have to go out here? If that's something that a community wants, you would think the people who we elect, and this is taking pressure off black elected Democrats. I'm putting this pressure on anyone that says they're a Democrat. Just like in downstate Illinois, when you look at Cairo, Illinois, and you have a Democratic state rep, the question is, why are 70% of the people who live in Cairo unemployed? Why isn't that Democrat? And I know this Democrat, and I have yet to see him push a bill that helps Cairo.
Right. Well, I think you make an interesting point. Trump is right. The Democratic Party has not been as loyal to the African American community as the African American community has been loyal to the Democratic Party. But in the same way that Kaepernick, in the spirit of Colin Kaepernick, the fact of the matter is, it's not an issue that's party specific. It's race specific. Both the Republicans and the Democrats have been disrespectful and placating to the African American community. So as Trump tries to paint the issue along party lines, it's really painted along racial lines. And while the ideals of the Democratic Party go further in advancing the interests of black folks, the application of such has a lot of black folk looking at the Democratic Party with a jaundiced eye, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But
I mean, think about it like this. What if I think that if a John Kasich had been saying what Trump is saying in a more nicer tone, more warmth in the words and how Trump is saying it, had it been of John Kasich, he probably could pull off 20-25% of the black vote. You know, I think it's the person that's saying that's hurting Republicans and not the fact that is being said.
Yeah, there may be some validity to what you're saying. I personally do not think black folks would come out to vote for policies that put a chokehold around their economic and social advancement. Just my opinion. And history has shown black folks typically go with the party that advances their interest. And yeah, Trump is right. At one point, the Republicans did free the slaves. But there's been some breaking news to all Trump folk. Over the last 150 years or so, there have been some changes. And while the Republicans did free the slaves, at one point, the fact that the abolition of slavery was a strategic means to preserve the Union and not so much a moral means to preserve black lives. And ultimately, they didn't free anybody. They shifted slaves from being in physical bondage to economic bondage, and that's what we're still dealing with today. So when you hear that argument that the Republicans actually freed the slaves, you tell people that there's been a shifting of ideology over the last 150 years that renders anything anybody would say that supported that argument is, like I said earlier, either being misinformed or intentionally misinforming. The fact of the matter is, black folks, we embrace candidates that embrace our interests. And at that time, it was in the best interest of African Americans to align themselves with the Republican Party, because the Republican Party at that time pushed interests that benefited us socially, that benefited us economically, and clearly played a huge role in removing the shackles around our arms, our ankles, and wrists. Times have changed. Times have changed. And typically around that time when we got that right to vote, folk and white elected officials in the South in protest shifted their interest in the direction of the Republican Party, led by Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats. Right. And again, policies that went against our interests, we ultimately shifted our allegiance from that of the Republican Party to that of the Democratic Party. But to your earlier point, Frank, it is, if there's any silver lining in Trump's buffoonery or the coonery of his black surrogates, it is the fact that the Democratic Party has not necessarily, it's been a fair weather friendship of sorts for the black community.
I mean, so what I mean by when I bring up Kasich is that Kasich in Ohio pulled off 20 to 25% of the black vote in Ohio. And if you get a John Kasich to say, hey, we do need a new civil rights agenda, we do need to look at ways and how we revitalize black neighborhoods, and you got a lot of black folks who are only voting for Hillary Clinton because she's like the better option of the two. But if you get a guy like Kasich who's going to get your Republican vote, he's going to get your conservative vote. I'm talking about like that perfect storm that would really hurt a Hillary Clinton. And you got black folks saying, we do need some things changed around here.
Right. But change isn't always good. And like you said, Kasich will probably be a lot more innocuous. He's not going to be as straightforward
Right.
and as duplicitous as Trump has been, not as xenophobic and prejudiced as Trump has been. But the fact of the matter is, don't pay attention so much to what they're saying. Focus more on the policies they endorse. And so when you look at it, John Kasich, he is all in favor of lowering taxes, which that is Republican speak for eliminating safety net programs that ensure that black and brown kids don't get shot and that they have
But
a
see,
plethora of
Kasich
safety.
didn't do that in Ohio. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, he's not necessarily in favor.
He's not what Kasich's main issue that a lot of people on the other side have with him is that he is so pro charter on the charter school tip, on the education tip, and he pushes vouchers.
A disaster for the black community.
And that's what I'm saying.
His kids don't go to charter school.
What I'm saying is the social service programs, they didn't get decimated in Ohio. But what I'm saying is you got people here in Chicago that are black that don't mind charter schools. Right. You got black people in Chicago who wouldn't mind having a voucher. You think about when you ask some mom who lives in K-Town and say, hey, I'll give you this voucher and you can send your kid to that Catholic school up the street on the other side of town and we'll help you with your bus fare. Some black people are willing to take that. Me, I'm anti-voucher because I think that if you put your money, all your money into public education, you can get all the things that you're supposed to get out your education system. But going back to Kasich, I'm saying he would have been able to get a better sale and get 10, 20% of the black vote, and he would have gotten some of the Hispanic vote. So if you look at it in hindsight, the perfect storm Republican that could have won the White House would have been a Kasich.
Yeah, perhaps. Let's do a Misty Copeland pivot here to Kaepernick. I believe it's a little past the 1 week anniversary that Kaepernick was the millennium version of Jim Brown as he spoke out against the national anthem and American racism and said, I am not going to stand. The fallout is continuing to resonate with Americans, resonate with the rest of the world. We know that his jersey has gone from being the
he's one of the top selling jerseys.
Was the number one selling jersey. It was ranked 20th. It's gone up to number one. He's wearing an afro. So for any folks that don't believe he's black, he is letting all y'all know he is in the spirit of Beyonce in formation. You understand me? And in addition to that, he's got a significant amount of support from the military and other folk who at one point may have not understood or did not want to understand what he was saying. What are some of your thoughts as we look back over the last week in the wake of
You know what?
Kaepernick?
If the NRA say I got a right to carry a gun, Kaepernick got a right to do whatever he want to do during that national anthem. If he want to sit down and flip his fingers around and play with his gym shoe while the national anthem is going on, I don't care, and neither should anyone else.
Right.
I mean, you want to sit back and talk about what wars were fought over, freedom. And he should have the freedom to sit back on his butt and do whatever he wants to do during that. And he's doing it for a very valid reason. I mean, I appreciate the fact that Jeremy Lane from the Seattle Seahawks did the same thing this week. And I hope that other people jump on board. His teammate, Vance McDonald, got on one knee. I mean, so when the national anthem plays, you're supposed to be celebrating all the freedoms that come with living in this country, and one of those freedoms is the freedom of speech.
Yeah, and I think we celebrate the ideal, but at the same time, when the ideal is not being applied fairly, which is exactly what Kaepernick is referring to, it gives one the right. Our Constitution says it's right to protest. So there's no question as to whether or not he has the right to do it. But the question does come up, is it right to do? And one thing that's different today than years ago when Jim Brown protested, when Jackie Robinson protested, when the Olympians in the 1968 during the 1968 Olympics in Mexico, when those John Carlos and other folk protested, you have a situation now where there's been a democratizing of media. everybody can weigh in on an opinion. Years ago, you had 2, 5, and 7. I'm sorry, ABC, NBC, and CBS that kind of cornered the market on public opinion. So other opinions that didn't have access to that stage were cast to the side. Now you have social media where he can get support in a matter of minutes from the 800 million folk, from at least 800 million more media sources. And those are people that articulate opinions, podcasts like this that defend him, and other outlets that lay the argument out and go deep into highlighting what he's representing, why he's protesting, and why the United States may be hypocritical in their
Well, I mean, let's put it in a
criticism.
nutshell as this. You stand up for the national anthem, you watch a football game, you jump in your car and get pulled over by a guy wearing the American flag on his shoulder saying, I pulled you over because you had one screw missing out your license plate and I need to search your car, and where you coming from and why you coming from there and where you headed to, where you work at, how can you afford this kind of car, things like that. And you want someone to sit up there and be forced to stand up during the national anthem? Nah.
Yeah, and he has a right to do it. Many folk are saying since he makes 17 to 19 million dollars a year and for throwing a football, he is how dare he? How dare he stand up and oppose a situation that has allowed him to make as much money as he does, doing what he by throwing a football.
But that was make America great. I can make money off you and still have a voice if I don't like what you're doing.
Right. And the fact of the matter is, making $19 million, if you work your money right, will make you impervious to poverty, but it doesn't make you impervious to prejudice. The bottom line is, there have been, Sheryl Sandberg and others have highlighted the fact that while they make awesome money, it doesn't protect them from being victims of chauvinism. So in that same spirit, because you are a black man that makes millions of dollars, that does not make you impervious to racism. Not only that, but many African Americans that play in the NFL and other sports actually come from the very communities that are victims of the police brutality and government malfeasance that Kaepernick has highlighted. So in that spirit, just because you make $1 million doesn't mean you don't feel the pain that the communities that from which you come are actually going through. And I think Richard Sherman, the cornerback for the Seattle Seahawks, I believe,
right,
made a good point. So many times athletes get criticized for not using their platforms other than for selfish means. So when athletes actually use their platform for means that move the social needle of this country and society, they get criticized. So, you get it's a catch-22 in many ways.
Well, like Harry Fonte said, hey, if he's saying something that's causing people to shake up, then he's saying the right things.
Good. As we pivot and do another Misty Copeland pirouette, and along the same lines, Troy LaRaviere, former principal at Blaine Elementary School in the city of Chicago, submitted his resignation. Frank, I know you are close to the Chicago Teachers Union and all things Chicago Public Schools. For those that don't know, LaRaviere raised a lot of hell, justifiably. He was the principal of the #1 neighborhood school in the city, and the number 3 school, elementary school overall. I don't know if you got a chance to read that resignation letter, Frank, but my goodness, if I ever need somebody to write a resignation letter, come on, Troy, let's sign you up. It was eloquent. He gave a history of his success at Blaine. He gave love to the teachers and staff. He highlighted some of the political obstacles that he had to deal with, highlight the fact how they prioritize politics over the progress of elementary school children. And he threw some jabs in the process. It was eloquent. It was firm. It was accurate. It was biting. And he has actually resigned.
Very smart move, because he still gets his money, and he still, if he ever wants to go back and be a principal, he can still try and go back and be a principal. But like he said, um, in front of people, in his open letter to the mayor, I don't expect your appointed board to deliver any justice any more than I expected to practice fiscal responsibility or competent educational management. However, my efforts to reverse your poor fiscal and educational management of our school system are just getting started. So he letting you know that, I'm stepping down from this, but I'm about to get engaged in that. And I don't know if you know, but he was just elected as president of the principals union. And that means that he now has a bigger platform to say his say and to get his message out. And think about it, this guy has something going on. If he was able to make Blaine as good of a school as it was, and he must knows the ins and outs of what we would call a turnaround school,
right,
to make these schools better. It's the same message. When you sit back and you talk about the school system here in the city of Chicago, and the fact that we pay taxes, yet we have no true voice as to what's really going on. When we have these different hearings and school closing hearings, all of it, I hate to say it, is a sham, and they only doing it because state law mandates them to do it. They already have it in their head what they want to do. So, like for example, when they went back, how much did they just borrow? $1 billion.
Yeah, 5.4.
And then you look at that high interest rate they're gonna have to pay on that because of poor fiscal management. When you look at the $20 million that was shifted around and went in people's pockets versus going into our kids' classrooms, and we sit back and you look about how charter schools are created so people can make money off the backs of poor black and brown kids. People, you really need to think about, what's really going on. That place for education is the key to a lot of people in deciding on how successful they become in life.
Right. Asked if Emmanuel would pivot on education policy as he did on police, LaRaviere was clear. He said only if the people force him to. He did not, because he didn't pivot on police. He actually came out with his lone officer theory, and the only thing that changed it was an uproar and protest in the streets and the call for his resignation. He came back a little softer, a little more willing to admit something might be wrong. It did not work. There was still an uproar in the streets, and that uproar caused a national action for his resignation. And then there was the famous Chicago City Council speech. As he indicated, he'll go as far as the public pushes him. And so there are many folk that criticize protest as though it's useless, it's pointless. Why take up the streets? You're clogging up freeways. You are interfering with with pedestrians on Michigan Avenue enjoying the city of Chicago. But at the end of the day, protests are ultimately the match that lights the wick of change. And Colin Kaepernick embodies that, and Troy LaRaviere embodies that. And so we wish him well. And, hopefully one day we can have him on the show to interview, because he's a bright, fascinating, and exceptionally brave young man, all tenets of heroism that we hopefully we all strive to be and definitely want our children to be. So as we pirouette again, Frank, let's talk a little bit about and stay on the same subject of schools and protests and what happens when you protest successfully. Diet School. If you recall, Walter Diet School is on 51st Street on the south side of Chicago.
In your neck of the woods,
my neck of the woods, close to the Hyde Park community and the heart of the Bronzeville community area. And if you recall, I think school starts tomorrow. Yeah, school starts tomorrow. Diet High School will reopen its doors and welcome about 150 freshmen. There'll be a memorial that will pay tribute to the school's history, including the 12 hunger strikers who made international news with their protests to keep the school from being shut down.
It's going to be an art school, right?
I believe it's an art school, and there's a green technology component. For those that may have forgotten or were not aware, there was a hunger strike. The picture was painted in 2012. Chicago Public School Board voted to phase out Walter Diet, and at that time, dozens of other schools in black communities were shut down across the city of Chicago. I believe it was about 47 of them. Shutting down Diet, they said, would leave young people in the community without any neighborhood high school, indicating that the closest one was 2 miles away. So a bunch of rallies ensued, sit-ins came about, eventually forcing the school to keep the promise of keeping the school open. And so there was this coalition of community members and organizations led by an organization named COCO, longtime community-based organization that envisioned Diet with a new curriculum focused on green technology and global leadership. There were some delays on the part of CPS and some juxtapositioning and stalling on the part of CPS. Ultimately, what happened, these 1,200 strikers, these 12 folk went on a hunger strike. They sat in Washington Park. They sat at Operation Push, which is close by, sat at Diet in the summer heat, drinking only liquids for 34 days. If you recall,
some of them went to the hospital.
Someone went to the hospital. One of the women, one of the female strikers fainted. Well, here's what happens when you protest successfully. As a result of the protest, the school is still open, and they got $14 million in new improvements. It's an art-focused green school with a green technology component. They have this black box theater, a dance room, a student art gallery, and protesting matters. That is the takeaway. And shout out to Coco and G2 Brown, April Stogner, Jeanette Taylor, Aisha Bay, Arlene Robinson, Monique Smith, and the rest of the strikers that played a key role in pushing the envelope and forcing the establishment to do something that they did not want to do and did not intend on doing.
Well, you know what? What I like about COCO, which means Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, is that they have shown what you can do when you organize and you're focused on resolving an issue. Diet was a school that was actually doing real good before, Ernie Duncan and everyone else came along to CPS and decided to get on this whole charter movement. And basically what they did was they strangled Diet. And this is what they do. First thing they do is, Diet was a perfect example, they start shutting the money off. So what happens is now you don't have an arts program. Then next, you don't have a science program. Then, all the little things that happen in the auditorium, those events start going away. Then instead of having gym where the kids are exercising, it's just some unorganized gym thing you got going on during that time. And all of a sudden the school nurse is gone. The school librarian has been cut. There is no arts program. There is no band. Everything that attracted a parent to want to put their student into the school leaves. So now all of a sudden, those parents who are normally engaged in the school, like the local school councils or the PTAs or what have you, they begin to transfer their kids out. So as CPS strangles the school by taking this money away, the good parents are pulling out too. Canoe is a perfect example of what you do to a neighborhood when you want to go down the tubes. You pull all the resources out. The people who got resources leave too. And so now what you have is the shell of a school of its old self, and now it's on the shutdown list.
Right.
And the people at COCO said, no, that's not going to happen here. We're going to sit on this. We're not going to eat. Even though COCO didn't get everything they wanted out of this deal, even though they didn't meet their ultimate objective, one thing that you cannot take away from them is the fact that Diet is not a closed school.
No doubt about it, Frank. And unfortunately, you have facets of government. And again, this is what Colin Kaepernick is talking about. This is what Troy LaRaviere is talking about. So many other folk are talking about across the country. This is what Black Lives Matter is talking about. Folk have been talking about since 1619 when we got here as Black folk. What happens is you have government that stabs communities in the back by taking resources away from them, stabs the community in the back, gives the community the knife and puts it in their hand and says, look what you did to yourselves.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I think that that is not an analogy I came up with. I actually read that online, but the fact of the matter is, it is true. And as a result of that, the community went on a diet, a protest diet, so that they can save diet. And ultimately, that is what happened. And so, kudos to all those in what's referred to as the movement that moved the social needle, whether they did it in the streets, whether they did it on the radio, whether they protested with their fingers, whether they protest hashtagging, or just by protesting by sparking discussion, initiating debate, in an effort to become have a better knowledge platform to know what's going on. So kudos to Diet and those 12 hunger strikers that without them would be no diet. So I think we have about maybe 15, 19 minutes left.
Let's talk about a thing that we need to really look at here in this state. You know, what has always perplexed me about um, our state is our tax structure and how it hurts black folks. And what I mean by that is, Canoe, when this whole American dream, this whole American system is, and what I'm doing is comparing my life in the Atlanta area to the Chicago area.
Okay.
So when you, let's say you grow up in the hood, you go off to college or you get your trade or whatever, you start making a little money. Um, you see that woman that you dated in high school or you dated throughout college or you met shortly after you came out of college and started working, or your company is prospering and y'all get married and decide you want to have that big backyard and the driveway and
American Dream.
the
Right.
4 bedroom house, and you can't really get that in the urban or in the city, so you move to the suburb. But you want to move to a suburb with people who look like you. And so you up, and if you're in Atlanta, you may move out to some county like Clayton County, or you may uh, go somewhere like Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is an all black suburb now. And you go get your nice big house, and you sitting there and you live in it. Where in Chicago, I guess ours would be the south suburbs. And so you move to a country club hills where you see a nice $300,000 house, and you move on in, and next thing you know, your property taxes are more than what your mortgage is. Whereas in Georgia, it's not like that. And you sit back and you ask yourself, well, why is that? And it's because our tax system is so screwed up. Illinois has the highest property tax rate in the country. And the reason why is that our funding formula for schools is so messed up that the black, I don't want to say affluent, but supposed to be middle class suburbs has to tax the homeowners like crazy just to give you, and now it's a substandard school system.
Okay.
When it should be an excellent suburban school system. And so you got people, I mean, if you go online now, you can see a 5,000 square foot house for $200,000, but the property tax bill is $18,000 a year.
Okay.
And that's ridiculous. And that's why, I tell people that Illinois need to switch to a progressive income tax and shift this tax burden off of the homeowner and onto the whole other parts of the tax system. you know and so if you live in Chicago, you're slowly starting to see that, where the mayor tried to give people whose homes were worth less than $250,000 kind of a break. But Chicago property taxpayers have seen 2 or 3 property tax increases in the last year and a half.
Yeah, you've done a good job of laying out a lot of those symptoms, and you're absolutely right, Frank. In fact, Illinois was named as one of the worst states to live in for taxes. It actually ranks as the nation's ninth worst state for taxes. And the report included this really shaky forecast for the state's taxes. This, despite the fact that the state's income tax rate dropped to a flat rate of 3.75% from 5% at the start of 2015. The bad news is that taxes on just about everything else in Illinois are high and could go higher as lawmakers grapple with the largest state budget in the United States. The report actually claimed that the flat tax may not be um, last because total liabilities are exceeding assets by 45%. So when you look at the state's financial statement, what we owe far exceeds what we have by almost 50%. So there are these proposals tied to the state needing to raise taxes by 17%, the state needing to cut services by 16%, or increase worker pension contributions by 400%, which I don't think they're able to do because there's a constitutional bulletproof jacket in place that ensures that you can't mess with people's pensions. Frank, I agree with you 100%. I believe in a progressive tax, which you see in other states across the country. I also think you need to remove some of the many loopholes that businesses and large corporations and some of these Walmarts and big box retailers get. Unfortunately, cities and municipalities across the state, across the country, think that what they need to do to get your Walmarts into cities is to give them the best tax breaks and tax abatement deals possible, where you're paying taxes on pennies on the dollar, or you're saying, for X amount of years, you don't have to pay any business taxes at all. You need to remove some of those loopholes. And most importantly, remove some of the, adjust some of our tax law that ensures that rich people don't have to pay their fair share, which we've heard on the national level, which we've heard Hillary talk about, which we've heard Bernie Sanders articulate in no uncertain words. That will probably go a long way in addressing the pressure that the communities that we're talking about have to deal with.
And you know what? Another thing that, if you really want to be real with it, another thing that needs to happen is, and I get what both sides, I get their arguments. Granted, let's say there were 5 new grocery stores that opened in black neighborhoods, and 5 new retail stores or retail centers that open in black neighborhoods, and black people had the income to support those businesses. Well, that means more people are paying into the tax system through sales taxes and things of that nature, which will allow other folks tax burden to come down, because you can reduce taxes because you're bringing in enough money to pay for things. I don't believe that hitting people who have paid into the pension system, I don't believe that hitting government employees by forcing a 400% increase on their contribution is the key to this. Remember, Illinois is paying a stiff price, and we try to blame elected officials, but at the end of the day, it's all of our fault, because we sat back and allowed pension holidays. We sat back and allowed them to do things, them meaning elected officials, to do things that were good for us short term, bad for us long term. And that sounds like, a Republican mantra or what Republicans say. But for example, here's a great example for you Trump lovers. How can Donald Trump sit up and say he's going to cut all these taxes, but then hire a ton of Border Patrol agents? How do you do that?
Yeah, there's some inconsistency there. And the bottom line is people hate paying taxes, okay? I don't like paying taxes, and elected officials respond to that. They hate to push legislation or policies that result in an increase of taxes, because that turns voters off and they're trying to keep their jobs. I do not like to pay taxes, but I don't like going to the dentist either, but I want to make sure that my teeth are right and that I'm able to eat what I want to eat and where I won't have any cavities. There's some things that we don't like to do that when we do them, it actually in the long term helps us.
You know
And
what?
so
I think that
we're going to have to pay.
for a lot of people, if they saw a return on the taxes that they pay, they would be a little they would it'd be easier for them to swallow that. It'd be easier for them to say, okay. So, and what I mean by that is, if my taxes went up and it's because they're building 5 new elementary schools to replace the old elementary schools, I can see what my tax dollar is doing. Or if the gas tax went up 3 cents and it's because they're repaving every major expressway and arterial street in the city.
Or dollars are going to dollars that I pay as a result of an increase in my taxes go to support community-based programming that minimizes the number of kids that are having funerals too early.
Right. So, for example, if my income tax went up a 1/4%, and we're going to take that 1/4% that we're taking, and we're going to build 20 new Croc centers throughout the state, designed on giving kids something to do other than hanging on the corner.
Right. So when you hear people say we don't want you to pay taxes, we're in favor of lowering taxes. It sounds good for folk that want to keep more money in their pocket, but it's game ultimately. And what that means is programs and policies that would go towards preserving and developing the communities we're talking about go away. Okay. And so Republicans, not Trump, but many of the Republicans are good at selling a particular policy, making you think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But you look up one day and income inequality is expanding. Police are not doing what they should do in communities. That has a ripple effect. There's a shortage of mental health professionals in schools, social workers in schools. And so when you see kids act a fool, it's, again, a symptom of something bigger. And typically it's either policies that a GOP or Republican policy that put a stranglehold around our process, our access and progress, or ultimately when it ends up being is, something even worse. So I think we have a few more minutes left, maybe 5 or 7 minutes. In that same spirit, Illinois recipients of the Obamacare exchange, things are going to get crazy. Things are about to get real. There's going to be a steep increase in premiums, and there's also going to be fewer plans to choose from. So some of the big insurers like Aetna, United Healthcare, and Coventry are pulling out of the Illinois exchange next year after substantial losses on individual plans in 2015. In addition to that, the Land of Lincoln Co-op has been shut down after losing $90 million last year, and Blue Cross Blue Shield, which dominates the Illinois market, is raising premiums after losing almost $500 million in the individual market in 2015 and $290 million in 2014. Well, what's the result? Less choice in doctors and hospitals when the enrollment period for 2017 begins November 1st. Why is this happening? Right? Obamacare has increased access to health insurance for about 20 million more people across the country. It is a good thing. Well, the reason is this. All those insurance companies are not making enough money because too many people with serious health problems are using the exchanges and not enough healthy people are signing up. So this shows that a healthcare system run by for-profit companies is designed to avoid sick people. So you have these giant health insurers like Aetna and others that are basically consolidating into 2 or 3 huge entities. So,
well, it's not only that though. If you look at it, when the Affordable Health Care Act first got up and running, the federal government put in a ton of subsidies to help offset that cost. And everyone knew that each year going forward, the amount of federal subsidy that goes into um, the Affordable Care Act from the federal government was going to come down. And these insurance companies knew this. So what they did was they took that money they got from the federal government, covered you for a minute, and you're right. There's not enough healthy people paying into the system as well, because a lot of healthy people have jobs and they got their own private insurance. And so there's no need to um, um, go get into the exchange, and so what you have in exchange is basically the self-employed, poor folks who don't have a job,
but are not eligible for Medicare.
And not eligible because they just don't,
not poor enough.
Right, they're not poor enough, or they're not old enough. So when you got only that left in that pot, you're going to see everyone pull out eventually, and only have maybe, like you said, 2 or 3 companies that's going to offer it. And that's why when the talk about doing the Affordable Health Care Act was debated, you had people from the other side of the coin, Bernie Sanders, them folks wanted, I think, the single payer option.
Public option. So basically, private insurers are going to have to, private insurers would have to compete with a federal government version of health insurance.
Exactly.
So that would ultimately result in the price of premiums coming down for all those private companies, and allowing for more, obviously, competition makes the price of insurance cheaper, but it also results in a decrease of profits that some of these big entities are used to getting. That didn't happen. So to your point, Frank, the real choice for the future is either a public single payer system or a hugely expensive for-profit single payer monopoly that will avoid people who need health care. And so when you talk about how that affects the African American community, you have a large number of those 20 million people that are now getting Obamacare who are African American.
So when you look at this whole, and you had people that was going to predict this, that in 3 to 4 or 5 years after this Affordable Care Act gets going, now my question is going to be going forward, because this law is going to have to be amended. This act is going to have to be amended. What are you going to amend it to? Because if you don't have insurance and you don't get into the exchange, people are going to take the hit when the government start taking their income tax returns to pay for their health insurance.
No doubt about it. So when Trump went back and talked about what you have to lose, well, this is what you have to lose.
Exactly.
We talked extensively about some of those things during this program, and ultimately, this is another example when the Republicans refused to embrace the public option. That was their way of sabotaging Obamacare. And if we don't make some changes, a lot of more folk will be affected. So I think we're wrapping up here. It's the end of the show. Happy Labor Day. Be careful. Enjoy that linen. Enjoy that white.
Man, I can't wait to get my grill going. I know I'm running late on it.
And I'm coming over. Man. Frank's wife is going to be cooking. Me and Nadine are going to be real close, and the boys are going to be hating on me because I'm eating all the links. Happy Labor Day. Enjoy. Be safe. We'll talk to you next week.
God bless. Enjoy yourselves.